I think people have like a complicated relationship with silence. And
Yeah.
I think we don't want it, and I think we're not taught to accept it.
Right.
And so that was sort of the key in at least in my youth ministry, was teaching students that it was okay. It's okay to sit in silence. It's actually okay to accept it. It's okay to feel those feelings. The key is not to judge them too much, and not to judge yourself for whatever comes to you in those moments.
Welcome to Great Bible Teacher Interviews. Hello, I'm Rick Jordan, President of Great Bible Teachers. Each week I have the opportunity to interview an author, a scholar, or a practitioner. We talk about the Bible, or biblical interpretation, or spiritual formation. Today I'm pleased to present to you the interview that I had with Garrett Mostowski. Garrett and I met at a writers' conference in Princeton, New Jersey, several years ago when I did this recording. At that time, he had graduated from Princeton and was working at a church across the street, Trinity Episcopal Church, and was preparing to move to Montana to pastor. After his pastorate in Montana, he is now going as a co-pastor with his wife to Fort Street Presbyterian Church in Detroit, Michigan. During his ministry, Garrett has found that silence and a slow, pondering reading of Scripture has been very effective for persons that he has been leading in ministry, whether they are 12 years old or 90 years old. I hope you'll enjoy this interview.
In your experience, share with us about a teacher who has influenced you in somehow, how they influenced you.
Yeah, I think of Walter Brueggemann, the author. He has been so important for me in just understanding how to look at Scripture. And so I think a lot of times Bible teachers will try to sort of, give you answers to a certain text, or give you perspectives on a certain text. So you could look at it this way or this way. And what Brueggemann's done for me is sort of given me the tools to interpret the text for myself. In ways that I couldn't before. And he always wants to apply the lens of empire and the lens of a marginalized people who lived thousands of years ago, struggling against empires that were coming over and over. We think about the Assyrians, the Assyrian Empire, which is who Jonah was sort of railing against. Or we think about the Babylonians who came and conquered the Assyrians. And the Israelites were an empire at their own time, and the prophets are critical of their empire, of Solomon and David, some of them. And so it's this conversation between people who have been marginalized, people who have been sort of made commodities by empire, who have been bought and sold into slavery or into exile. And that narrative is really important when we look at the Bible. And we should always keep it in mind when we encounter the text. And, Brueggemann's really given me that. And more than anything, too, he's pointed me toward rabbis and sort of midrash and the tradition among, Jewish scholars of taking the text and interpreting its meaning and always being creative with it, but also still following a sort of tradition and coming from a line of scholars and doing it in a certain way. And so I'll sometimes just pick up a midrash and see, in the Old Testament, and see what those scholars have to say. See what Jewish academics have been saying for years and years and years. But if I had to name one person, I would say Brueggemann. But he kind of pointed me to all these different places.
Yeah.
A little bit about my experience. I worked as a youth pastor for 4.5 years in Montrose, Colorado, and it's where I originally was introduced to the idea of holy reading, and actually used it as a curriculum for my youth group kids. And so it became a part of every week at youth group we would do a type of holy reading, which is unusual, I think, for some people in the youth ministry world, because getting 12-year-olds to sit still for up to 45 minutes, I always bragged, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm actually really proud to sort of shepherd young people along to the point that they could meditate for 45 minutes.
Wow.
So I did that for 4.5 years, and after that I came here to seminary for 4 years, where I actually led a holy reading group across the street at Trinity Episcopal. I've only been doing that the last 2 years. I haven't done it for 4 years here, but so yeah, and that's been a great group. It's just been about 9 of us that meet every Friday morning at 10:30, and we meet for an hour, and we meditate for 45 minutes of that, and then we spend about 15 minutes discussing our experience, not necessarily the text, but our experience of our time in the Holy Reading.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did you first even hear about this yourself and think, wow, this would be great to expose the young people to?
Yeah. Well, I read a book by Mark Yaconelli called, I'm going to forget the name of it, the Contemplative Youth Ministry, or Contemplative Youth Ministry, I believe it was called. And in it, Mark sort of talks about a different way of doing youth ministry, and he mentions Lectio Divina and provides some references to the Desert Fathers and Mothers and other resources from early Christianity that use this as a legitimate spiritual practice in their weekly or daily lives. And I just began to study that a lot. I began to immerse myself in those stories, and I began to sit with other people who had done Holy Reading, and I read Mark's book and just kind of followed the directions.
Really?
Okay. Yeah, and then tried to do it in my own way, and I was comfortable making it my own. I didn't think that I had to be perfect in the way that he outlined it, and I don't think that any author would expect that. I think they just want to encourage people to try something new. That's what I did. So and it worked out well. The kids were responsive, they loved it, and I think especially in an over-programmed world for young kids and young adults, it's important. It's important to take that time to sit, to be, and to listen to words slowly.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of silence as a discipline, and how that plays into this particular spiritual discipline.
Yeah. Well, I think I would say a lot of people are afraid of silence. People don't want to be alone. We always have our phones with us. I know where my phone is. It's right here, and I have it, and it's with me. And a lot of times when we're in transition in life, or we don't have someone that we're talking to, or we're waiting, we're not just sitting in silence and existing. We're actually on our phone, and so and that's not really silence, even if it is quiet outside. And so I wonder if people are afraid of it. I wonder if they're uncomfortable with it. I don't want to say too much. For myself, I would say I'm afraid of it sometimes, because I don't want to maybe process some of the things I need to process that may have happened, in the silence. And those are the times when, those thoughts will sort of come to you. Like if you have a conflict going on in your family, let's say between you and a parent, during the silence, you might have to come to terms with that. It might, present itself to you, and you have to make a choice. And I think that choice is easier to not make than to make, to not deal with it. And so, I think people have like a complicated relationship with silence. And I think we don't want it, and I think we're not taught to accept it. And so that was sort of the key in at least in my youth ministry, was teaching students that it was okay. It's okay to sit in silence. It's actually okay to accept it. It's okay to feel those feelings. The key is not to judge them too much, and not to judge yourself for whatever comes to you in those moments.
Okay.
Yeah.
So walk us through like the church where you've been serving, and did they already have a group? Did you initiate this, and how did you either initiate or abridge kind of what they have been doing?
So they've had a group going for about 30 years that's done a form of Lectio Divina, but mostly they just did silent prayer, and they called it their silent prayer group. And sitting in silence is a part of Lectio Divina, but there's an older tradition that goes back to sort of a longer process. And so when I came in, they actually approached me and said, would you be willing to maybe change things up for us, and to modify the structure that we've had for 30 years, which was an honor, because I don't know many people that will do that in churches, that will come to you and say, hey, would you mind changing what we do, because we're kind of bored with it, And I felt really honored, and I said, well, I'll just do with you what I did with my youth group students. And so the process that I introduced them to, I typically start off by saying, we're going to sit in silence for 5 minutes, And I try to guide that silence as much as I can, but I don't want my own voice to be distracting either. And so during the silence, I might say to them, take some deep breaths, and remind them to take deep breaths, because throughout the day we actually forget to breathe a lot. We need to breathe, and breathing's obviously, it keeps us alive, but it's healthy for you to breathe in deep and intentional ways. And so during that 5 minutes, to breathe intentionally, to breathe heavily, and then begin to notice your thoughts. And there are a lot of scholars, academics, mystics. I think of Richard Rohr. I think of Cynthia Bourgeault. That will tell you this, but to notice your thoughts, but don't judge them. Don't judge whatever comes to you. Just see them and then let them pass. And there's one author, I'm going to forget his name, but he gives the analogy of leaves falling into a river. And the leaves will fall into the river and they'll float down and then they'll pass away. So just imagine those thoughts are the leaves falling out of a tree into a river, and then they're passing out of sight. But they're there, and it's okay to acknowledge them. We just don't want to judge or linger or try to grab them out of the river, I guess. And in that silence, what we want to do is get to a place of centering. And this is the first movement in Lectio Divina, is the center. And trying to find that. And it's a little difficult, I think, because you can't really achieve that center in 5 minutes. Some people will sit for an hour before they center. But the goal is to get somewhere near there, to calm yourself, to begin to be, and it's all done to prepare yourself to encounter what God would have to say to you during the reading, which is the next part. And during the reading, I always like to, I would practice the passage that we were going to read that day, and I would always try to choose something that was very image heavy, because that helps our minds. And I learned that practice dealing with youth group students, because if you do too much that's abstract or that's a little over their head, you're going to lose their attention. So I like to use image driven passages that also have a narrative behind them, because people connect to that much more easily than, say, Paul, in Romans, where you get these long abstract passages. That's not to say you couldn't use them, though. And I have used them during Lectio. But I like to practice those first, and I like to say them, and I like to sort of begin to feel what the words sound like in my mouth and how they come out, so that when I read it, there's an intentionality, and you say it slowly. So for example, if we were doing Genesis 1, I might say, you might try to read it poetically, because it's a longer poem. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And just sort of let that sentence sit for a minute. Just let the people listen to it. And I would only do, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 verses at a time. Not enough to confuse people, and not enough that they might think they could just figure out what the passage means right away. And so I do the reading 3 times, and in between each time I leave 2 to 3 minutes of silence. And during that time, what I'll do is just invite people to speak whatever word or phrase is really coming at them, whatever they think is popping. So if it was the first verse of Genesis, someone might say beginning. And you can say it as many times as you want, but I think it lends itself to the silence and the reading, because you're pulling out these words. You're pulling them not only out of context, but you're making people hear them in your voice, and you might be saying it in the way that it came to you, And who knows, you might be thinking of your beginning in life, you might be thinking beginning a new job, you have no idea. But there's an experience there. And then after that, we move into a time of contemplation or meditation. And a lot of people will separate out the difference between meditation and contemplation. I think that's a little much for beginners to try to do. But during that time, you're silent. So we finish the 3 readings. We don't speak anything else. And what I try to do is say, if you can keep what experience you had encountering the scripture in your mind for these next 5 or 10 and sometimes 15 minutes, depending on the group, keep it in there and just wrestle with it. Read it back in your mind. Focus on that word or phrase that came to you. Ask yourself what it meant, and then go back to that centering exercise that we did, and ask yourself, what are these thoughts that are coming after the encounter with this word, right? Because if we have a high view of Scripture, we believe that God is speaking through that, and if we believe that God's everywhere and God is speaking to us, then we can't encounter God and not be affected.
Right.
And so we should notice those thoughts. We should notice what happens to us after the scripture comes to us.
Mm-hmm.
And then I usually move into a time of prayer, and I call it, the oration. And some of the I think the Latin word is oratorio or something like that. And not a lot of people use this, but I think it's important. And I have everyone go around in the circle as long as they're comfortable and just say a prayer. And I think the prayer often illuminates what those people were meditating on or contemplating during that period of time. And it's important too to have time to speak during that, because it's an ancient form of prayer. It is an ancient form of reading the Bible, but I think it's first an ancient form of praying. And then after that time, what we do is I typically try to give them an image. So I'll have read the verse beforehand, and let's say it's the first chapter of Genesis. And I say, in the beginning, God created. I might say, I want you to imagine that you were there in the beginning, and that you are with the Spirit that is brooding over these troubled waters, and you're watching creation happen. And I'll just ask questions to get their mind going. What do you see? What do you feel? What colors are coming to you? What is the Spirit doing? What are you imagining? And I don't encourage them to answer. I actually want silence, but I want those questions turning for the last 5 minutes to transport them, hopefully, to a physical place, in a location in Scripture, to make it all the more real. And after that, we conclude, and typically people need a minute or two to reorient themselves because you've been silent and in this trance for maybe 45 minutes. And then I always ask about the experience. I say, tell me about your experience. Don't tell me how you would exegete the scripture. Don't tell me the right or wrong way to read it. Tell me what you experienced. Tell me what you were thinking. And I think that's an important thing for people, because the spiritual life is not about right and wrong answers or containing information. It's about the experience of God here and now. And this is a really great way, I think, to show people how that can take place.
Okay. So this, particularly this last step you're talking about, it's kind of a debriefing of what this experience was like for you.
Yeah.
What do people typically kind of share with when they do that?
It's all over the board. So I remember one student, we did a session privately together, and because he enjoyed it so much that he had worked out with his school that he would sort of be my intern, but the intern, he just wanted to learn how to meditate and to pray, which was really cool to see a 16-year-old take that initiative. And so I can remember sitting in my office, and we did, I'm not even going to remember what passage, but he said, during the time, Garrett, I kind of had a vision. And he was very skeptical of using that word, but he said, I had a vision, and I imagined myself as a jester in the court of a king, and I was trying to tell jokes, but no one was laughing at my jokes, but people were laughing. I just felt like they were laughing at me. And then he started crying. And I thought, I thought there has to be a God, because this comes out of, where does this come from? Where does this come from in someone? But for him, it was convicting because he felt like he needed to mature a little bit. He felt like he had been a little bit immature in courses and classes. And, I had never experienced him like that. I always thought he was respectful and great at youth group. But apparently he felt that he wasn't in other arenas of his life. And he felt convicted by it and wanted to talk about it. And so, someone would share that. Other people will just have a lot of questions, the reading will really disorient the way that they had previously understood the passage. And so they might share a little bit about that, or they might just ask for prayer requests. I know we had a member of our group across the street who had stage 4 cancer and was just sort of waiting. And he was in his last days, and he came every week. He would sit down, and we'll call him John, and John would come and he would pray, and at the end, sometimes he would just want to complain. Sometimes he would just want to moan about the world and how awful it was and how miserable he was. And there was space for that. And he would moan about how much he didn't want to hear the scriptures and how much they annoyed him and how much he was just frustrated by them. But he still kept coming.
He voluntarily came, right?
Exactly. And it was an important experience for him. So you get all sorts of things, and you never know what you're going to get. And I would encourage leaders, don't expect anything.
Uh-huh.
Even if you're met with silence, that's okay. People may not want to talk about what they saw, but what we have to trust as leaders is that God did come and God did encounter us. And we should know that from our own experience, and we should trust that in other people and not need sort of the feedback and the testimony of their experience to trust that. You know, we have to take it on faith. But yeah, you get all sorts of different perspectives and stories and visions and just thoughts.
Yeah.
I want to thank Garrett for his insights, his experience, and for his willingness to share that with us. A few takeaways for me. One is this idea of being silenced that we might be afraid of. It is worth pondering, what are we afraid of? What will we face? And worth pondering, is it okay to face that knowing that God is present and how God might move in us in that silence? And a second takeaway is that this idea of holy reading, it may be new to some of us, but we can integrate that in our teaching. I actually do this about every 7 or 8 weeks in my class. We spend time doing holy reading, Lectio Divina, through a passage of scripture that relates to the unit that we are studying. So I encourage you to integrate this into your curriculum, into your work as a teacher. Thank you again for joining us. If you would like more information about how to teach, I encourage you to sign up for the e-newsletter. Every Tuesday it comes out letting you know about a blog article that I've written. And then every Thursday it comes out notifying you of an interview such as this one. So please sign up so you'll know more about what we are offering at Great Bible Teachers. Thank you.